You've probably felt it before. That subtle sense that something is off. Not just in one interaction. Not just with one woman. But across patterns. Conversations. Expectations. You see it on first dates where gratitude is absent, but entitlement is loud. In relationships where your effort is assumed while her effort is optional. In breakups where accountability somehow never travels in both directions. In dating profiles that read less like introductions and more like invoices. And naturally, men start asking a dangerous question. Why does this feel so common now? Most people rush to simple answers. They blame individual women. They say it's bad luck. They tell you to just find better ones, or pick differently next time. But those explanations don't hold up when the pattern keeps repeating. Because patterns don't come from coincidence. They come from systems. Here's the first uncomfortable truth most people avoid. What you're experiencing isn't random behavior. And it isn't the result of women suddenly becoming worse people. It's the result of incentives. Modern dating doesn't feel broken because people forgot how to love. It feels broken because dysfunction is rewarded. Not by some secret group pulling strings behind closed doors, but by something far more mundane and far more powerful. Economics. Large systems don't operate on morality. They operate on profit. Governments, corporations, media platforms, cultural institutions, none of them wake up asking, how do we help people build stable, healthy relationships? They ask one question. What generates activity, engagement, consumption? And stability doesn't. Instability does. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's how every large system functions when scale replaces humanity. No one needs to sit in a room plotting against families or men or women. All it takes is millions of small profit-driven decisions pointing in the same direction. And when you zoom out far enough, the outcome looks intentional, even when it isn't. Once you understand this, modern dating stops being confusing. Not because it becomes pleasant, but because it becomes logical. Let's look at what happens economically when a relationship fails. One household becomes two. One rent payment becomes two. One set of furniture becomes two. Utilities double. Cars multiply. Therapists get clients. Lawyers get paid. Dating apps gain subscribers. Social platforms gain emotionally charged content. There is an entire economy that activates when relationships collapse. Now compare that to a stable, long-term partnership. Shared expenses. Fewer purchases. Less impulsive spending. More saving. More predictability. From a purely economic standpoint, a healthy couple is inefficient. Two emotionally unstable singles searching for connection generate far more economic activity than one stable household ever will. That doesn't mean anyone is deliberately sabotaging love. But it does mean there is no incentive to protect it. Dating apps don't want you to find your person. They want you to keep swiping. Social media doesn't benefit from your contentment. It thrives on comparison, insecurity, and longing. The dysfunction isn't an accident. It's the product. Look at the wedding industry. Billions spent on ceremonies that last a few hours for marriages that increasingly don't last years. No one profits from telling you simplicity works. Everyone profits from convincing you that love must be expensive, performative, and optimized for appearance rather than longevity. And when the marriage fails, the divorce industry is already waiting. What gets emphasized is the transaction, not the bond. The image, not the structure. The spectacle, not the commitment. Want proof that systems can change quickly when they want to? Look at how fast the world shifted during the pandemic. Entire economies shut down. Laws were rewritten. Behavior was regulated. Trillions were mobilized. The system demonstrated that it can move rapidly when incentives align. Now compare that to issues that affect families. Family court reform. Support for fathers. mental health resources for men, relationship education. Decades pass. Little changes. Not because solutions are impossible, but because there's no financial reward for solving them. Broken families create consumers. Lonely people spend more. Anxious people are easier to influence. Stable, content, emotionally grounded individuals are economically inconvenient. Pay attention to what culture normalizes quietly. Chaotic relationships portrayed as exciting. Materialism framed as empowerment. Transactional dynamics disguised as standards. Platforms where provocation becomes the fastest path to income. When a young woman sees that attention equals money, what lesson does she internalize about value? When chaos gets rewarded and stability gets ignored, what behaviors get reinforced? Culture doesn't just reflect human nature. It shapes it. And it's shaping it in ways that serve profit, not human connection. The behaviors men experience today didn't appear out of nowhere. They're cultivated, encouraged, normalized. Not because women are inherently greedy or rude, but because entitlement and extraction are profitable traits in the current environment. By the time a woman reaches her mid-20s, she's often absorbed a very specific message. That she deserves everything. That standards mean demands. That men prove worth through spending. That attention equals value. None of this prepares her for partnership. It prepares her for leverage. And here's the part most people miss. Men are being programmed to believe their value lies in what they provide. To earn love through performance. To tolerate poor treatment because they should be grateful for access. Both genders are shaped in opposite directions that make harmony difficult. Society still sells the image of lifelong partnership, but the system surrounding it undermines every behavior required to sustain it. This isn't about blaming women. It's about recognizing that the environment rewards dysfunction. And once you see that clearly, the frustration you feel stops being personal. It's systemic. And understanding that is the first step toward navigating it intelligently. There's a feeling many men experience in modern dating but rarely articulate out loud. A quiet sense of being drained. Not physically. Not even financially at first. Emotionally. It shows up as confusion. As walking on eggshells. As constantly second-guessing yourself. You pay, you plan, you listen, you support. And yet somehow, it's never enough. Say too little, you're emotionally unavailable. Say too much, you're weak. Lead, and you're controlling. Follow, and you lack direction. Provide, and it's expected. Ask for reciprocity, and you're insecure. The rules feel unwinnable because they are constantly shifting. This is where many men begin to feel exploited. And that feeling isn't imagined. But it's also misunderstood. Because the exploitation isn't usually conscious or malicious. It's systemic. Modern dating often functions like a one-way transaction because that's what the environment rewards. Men are conditioned to give. Women are conditioned to receive and evaluate. Not because women are evil, but because the cultural script tells them this is what empowerment looks like. And here's the dangerous part. Men's emotional attachment makes them especially vulnerable in this system. When men attach, they often attach deeply, quietly, completely. They don't drip-feed affection. They invest. And once invested, judgment weakens. A man in love will tolerate behavior he would never accept from a friend, an employer, or a stranger. He'll rationalize disrespect. He'll minimize his own needs. He'll sacrifice his well-being in the hope that patience will eventually be rewarded. This isn't stupidity. It's biology and psychology intersecting without guidance. Men are taught to suppress emotion, not understand it. So when emotion hits full force in romantic attachment, they have no tools to manage it. No framework. No language. No internal boundaries. The result is often codependency disguised as devotion. And in a culture that celebrates self-interest and extraction, that devotion becomes exploitable. Again, not always intentionally, but predictably. Understanding this matters because it reframes the problem. You're not weak for feeling this way. You're untrained. And untrained people get hurt in environments designed to reward manipulation. There's a narrative men have inherited for generations. Be a gentleman. Put her first. Sacrifice quietly. Provide endlessly. In a different era, that narrative was balanced by reciprocity. Social pressure enforced loyalty. Sacrifice moved in both directions. But the narrative survived while the conditions that made it fair disappeared. Men are still expected to sacrifice like it's the 1950s. But they receive none of the guarantees, respect, or stability that came with that deal. The obligations remain. The benefits are gone. This is where the gentleman myth becomes dangerous. Not because kindness is wrong, but because kindness without discernment becomes compliance. The man who gives endlessly while receiving nothing isn't noble. He's useful. The man who destroys himself for someone who wouldn't tolerate mild inconvenience for him isn't virtuous. He's being consumed. True virtue requires wisdom. It requires selectivity. It requires boundaries. Generosity should flow toward those who are generous in return. Sacrifice should exist where sacrifice is mutual. When virtue loses wisdom, it becomes a tool others use against you. And the system loves men who haven't learned this yet. Because men who overgive without standards are predictable. They spend more. They tolerate more. They stay longer in situations that harm them. Now let's talk about the influence layer that most people underestimate. There is an entire industry built around relationship anxiety. Influencers, pseudo-psychologists, dating coaches, empowerment content factories. Their business model depends on keeping people emotionally dysregulated. They promote impossible standards. They frame normal human flaws as red flags. They encourage hypervigilance and suspicion. They validate grievances without accountability. The message is always the same. You deserve everything. You owe nothing. If it doesn't feel perfect, leave. This content thrives because it feels good in the moment. It absolves responsibility. It externalizes blame. But it produces people who are incapable of sustaining connection. Every discomfort becomes a deal breaker. Every compromise feels like oppression. Every partner is a potential threat. And when relationships fail, the content doubles down. See, you were right to leave. The influencer wins. The platform wins. The individual ends up alone, confused, and increasingly bitter. This isn't unique to women. Men have their own version of poison. Content that reduces relationships to conquest. That promotes emotional detachment as strength. That treats intimacy as weakness. Both sides are being fed narratives that make them worse partners. Not healthier. Not wiser. Worse. The system profits from conflict, not harmony. And real people pay the price. Look at the outcomes. High divorce rates. Rising single-parent households. Children growing up disconnected from fathers. Men's mental health collapsing in silence. Divorced men are among the highest risk groups for depression and suicide. But those stories don't trend. They don't sell. They don't generate engagement. So they're ignored. These aren't abstract problems. They're human casualties of a culture optimized for consumption over connection. And here's the uncomfortable truth that often gets missed. Women aren't winning either. The same system that teaches entitlement also teaches delay. It tells them their value is unlimited and static. It encourages endless selection in a world where time is finite. Many follow the script perfectly, and wake up later wondering why it didn't work. Record numbers of women in their late 30s and 40s find themselves single, childless, and confused, not because they were bad people, but because they trusted a narrative that didn't account for reality. Everyone loses except the system. So if the system is broken, what does a healthy relationship even look like now? It starts with mutual investment. Not scorekeeping but symmetry. Both give. Both sacrifice. Both contribute. It requires emotional regulation, not suppression, but control. The ability to feel without being ruled by feeling. It demands accountability. No permanent victims. No permanent villains. It needs realistic expectations. Understanding that relationships are built, not found. None of this is complicated, but it runs directly against what culture rewards. Which means finding it requires filtering through many people who've been programmed differently. That filtering process is painful, but it's necessary. Because the alternative is lowering your standards to match the dysfunction around you. And that never ends well. One of the reasons modern dating feels so exhausting is that it operates without a shared rulebook. The old frameworks, traditional roles, clear expectations, social reinforcement, have largely been dismantled. And regardless of how flawed they were, they provided structure. People knew what was expected. There was a common starting point. What replaced them? Nothing coherent. We tore down the old system without building a new one. Now everyone is improvising. He believes he's supposed to lead. She interprets leadership as control. She expects emotional openness. He's been taught emotions are weakness. He thinks commitment is the goal. She's been told commitment is settling. Everyone is operating from a different script, and most don't even realize they're following one. That's why so many relationships feel like constant negotiation. Not about values, about definitions. What does effort mean? What does respect look like? What does partnership actually require? Without shared answers, every disagreement becomes existential. And that friction wears people down. The couples who survive in this environment tend to do one thing differently. They don't assume shared understanding. They make the implicit explicit. They talk about expectations early. They define roles intentionally. They build their own framework instead of borrowing one from culture. It's awkward. It's uncomfortable. But it's effective. Because ambiguity is where resentment grows. Another hard truth that needs to be said clearly. Modern dating punishes emotional naivete. Especially in men. A man who doesn't understand his own attachment patterns is at risk. He mistakes intensity for connection, urgency for chemistry, scarcity for value. He stays too long. He gives too much. He ignores early warning signs because hope overrides discernment. Not because he's weak, but because he's untrained. Self-awareness is protection. The man who understands when he's becoming irrational can pause. The man who recognizes emotional dependency forming can step back. The man who can walk away from disrespect without needing closure is insulated from a lot of pain. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming grounded. Loving without losing yourself. Caring without collapsing. Giving without being depleted. Culture rarely teaches this. So men learn it the hard way, through loss. And here's where standards get misunderstood. Standards aren't demands you place on others. They're requirements you enforce on yourself. If you expect honesty, you practice it. If you expect effort, you give it to those who reciprocate. If you expect respect, you leave when it's absent. Standards without enforcement are fantasies. Raising your standards doesn't mean becoming rigid or entitled. It means becoming selective. And selectivity is not cruelty. It's clarity. Most dysfunctional dynamics persist because one person is afraid to walk away. Fear of loneliness. Fear of starting over. Fear of being replaced. That fear makes people negotiable in ways they shouldn't be. The irony is this. The less you need a relationship, the healthier the relationships you're capable of having. Desperation attracts manipulators. Wholeness attracts partners. When your life is full, purpose, friendships, competence, direction, relationships become additions, not rescues. And that changes everything. Now let's talk about something that rarely gets addressed honestly. The system doesn't care whether you find love. It doesn't care whether you're fulfilled. It doesn't care whether you're lonely. It cares whether you're consuming. So waiting for culture to improve is wasted energy. Complaining about dating trends doesn't protect you. Arguing about gender politics doesn't heal you. Resentment doesn't build a life. What does? Personal responsibility. Not the shallow version that ignores systemic influence, but the deep version that acknowledges reality and still chooses agency. You work on your emotional wounds. The abandonment fears that make you cling. The validation hunger that makes you tolerate disrespect. You examine your patterns. Why you're drawn to certain personalities. Why familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar peace. You build competence. Physically, professionally, socially. Not to impress, but to stabilize. A stable man is hard to manipulate. He doesn't need to rush intimacy. He doesn't need to win approval. He doesn't confuse attention with affection. He chooses, instead of chasing. And here's the paradox that culture won't tell you. Becoming someone who doesn't need a relationship is often the prerequisite for having a good one. Because need distorts judgment. When you're afraid to be alone, you negotiate against yourself. You accept conditions you shouldn't. You overlook character flaws because you're focused on avoiding loss. But when you're complete on your own, you can evaluate clearly. You can say no. You can walk away. You can wait. That patience filters people faster than any strategy ever will. The broken system makes this harder, yes, but not impossible. Good people still exist. They're just rarer. And harder to find because they don't stand out in a culture that rewards spectacle over substance. They're not loud. They're not performative. They're consistent. Which means you have to be someone who can recognize consistency, not confuse chaos with passion. Most people don't fail in relationships because they're unlovable. They fail because they're operating unconsciously in an environment designed to exploit unconsciousness. Awareness changes the game. Not overnight. Not magically. But permanently. You stop taking dysfunction personally. You stop trying to save people who don't want to change. You stop internalizing outcomes that were never under your control. You become strategic instead of emotional. And that doesn't make you less human. It makes you safer. Here's where everything comes together. The system is broken, and it has no incentive to fix itself. Economic pressure will continue to reward instability. Culture will continue to glorify chaos. Influencers will continue to monetize insecurity. Platforms will continue to amplify conflict because conflict keeps people engaged. Waiting for the environment to change is a losing strategy. So the only viable move left is internal. You become resilient. Not hardened. Not cynical. Resilient. You build a life that has weight without requiring validation. Work that gives you identity beyond attention. Friendships that ground you. Competence that creates self-respect. When your foundation is solid, dating stops feeling like survival. It becomes optional. That alone protects you from most manipulation. You stop asking, "How do I get chosen?" and start asking, "Who is worthy of access to my life?" That shift is subtle, but everything changes when it happens. You also stop confusing intensity with intimacy. The system trains people to mistake emotional spikes for connection, drama for passion, volatility for depth. But real connection is quiet, predictable, stable, and because it doesn't generate adrenaline, culture ignores it. Learning to value calm over chaos is a form of rebellion now. You also develop emotional literacy. You don't suppress feeling. You interpret it. You learn the difference between attraction and attachment, between loneliness and desire, between chemistry and compatibility. That discernment saves years of pain. And you stop negotiating your boundaries. Not aggressively. Not defensively. Simply calmly. If something doesn't align, you don't argue. You don't persuade. You disengage. This isn't cruelty. It's respect for your own life. One of the hardest lessons for men in modern dating is this. No amount of patience can turn dysfunction into health. No amount of understanding can replace accountability. No amount of love can fix someone who benefits from chaos. Walking away isn't failure. It's maturity. Now let's answer the question we started with. Why does it feel like there are so many rude and greedy people in modern dating? Because the environment rewards rudeness. Because entitlement is framed as empowerment. Because extraction is normalized. Because instability is profitable. Not because human nature suddenly deteriorated, but because behavior adapts to incentives. Change the environment, and behavior changes. But since you can't change the system, you change how you move within it. You stop personalizing rejection. You stop internalizing dysfunction. You stop believing that someone else's inability to love is a reflection of your worth. You also stop looking for the system to validate your experience. It won't. Lonely men don't trend. Stable relationships don't go viral. Quiet integrity doesn't sell ads. So you build your life off camera. You heal what makes you susceptible to manipulation. You develop standards rooted in values, not fear. You become someone who can walk away from potential without regret. And here's the quiet truth most people never reach. Whether or not you find a partner, you win. If you find someone aligned, you build something real in a world designed to prevent it. If you don't, you still have a life worth living. Both outcomes are acceptable. The man who needs external validation will suffer in relationships and outside of them. The man who has built internal stability will be fine either way. That's freedom. So the original question, why are there so many rude and greedy women? Turns out to be the wrong question. The better question is, what kind of system consistently produces this behavior? Once you see the answer clearly, confusion disappears. You're not at war with women. You're not competing against men. You're navigating a culture optimized for profit, not connection. And that clarity is power. Because when you understand the game, you can choose how to play, or whether to play at all. The system doesn't care about your happiness. So you do. You build yourself. You raise your standards and your value at the same time. You seek out the few people who've escaped the programming. They exist. They're just quiet. And remember this above all else. The dysfunction you're seeing isn't human nature. It's manufactured. Which means different environments produce different outcomes. You can create those environments in your own life. You can attract people who resonate with them. You can build something real despite everything working against you. That's not naive hope. That's strategy.